Welcome to Raw History. Here, we cut through romanticization and speculation to show you, well, the unfiltered reality of human history. Claims about Roman aqueducts using immense timber structures that defied rot for centuries through specialized preservation techniques, honestly, misrepresent both the construction of aqueducts and how Roman timber actually survived. Roman aqueducts were built primarily of stone, brick, and concrete, not timber. The materials used to build the arcades included stone blocks, concrete, mortar, tiles, and bricks. Wooden scaffolding was used during construction to allow the workers to put the arcades together piece by piece, but this temporary scaffolding was removed once construction finished. Understanding what Roman aqueducts actually were and how Roman timber truly survived reveals both impressive engineering and genuine preservation conditions without needing to invent non-existent technologies. The Romans constructed aqueducts throughout their republic and later empire to bring water from outside sources into cities and towns. Aqueducts moved water through gravity alone, along a slight overall downward gradient within conduits of stone, brick, concrete, or lead. Most conduits were buried beneath the ground and followed the contours of the terrain. Where valleys or lowlands intervened, the conduit was carried on bridgework using the iconic stone arches that define Roman aqueduct architecture. The spicus, or water channel, was on the top level of the viaduct and covered with a roof or vault. The channel was usually waterproofed with a layer of opus signinum, which is a kind of mortar made of fragments of crushed tiles and amphorae. The arcades, series of arches supported by columns, were built entirely from durable stone, not wood. Each arch's lateral thrust was supported by its neighbour, so these were long spans of arches using each other's weight as support to stay standing. Timber, served only temporary roles during aqueduct construction. Centering was the wooden structure that bore the arch's weight until the last stone was laid. When it was removed, the slotted stones could support their own weight. Sometimes, such as when constructing bridges over bodies of water, it just wasn't possible to construct the piers of the bridges on land. In these situations, the Romans used cofferdams, temporary structures created by digging a ring of timber logs into the riverbed, filling gaps with clay to create a watertight seal, pumping out water, and then building permanent stone piers. After all the work was done, the logs were removed and the piers stood firmly in the water. So how did Roman timber actually survive? The 24 oak timber planks analyzed in a 2019 study were not from aqueducts but from the foundations of a richly decorated portico belonging to a vast and wealthy property in Rome. All samples were really well preserved as they were saturated with water. In many cases, the vessels of the wooden planks were filled with hard, glassy, translucent, whitish mineral deposits deriving from the site. The planks survived because they were immersed in waterlogged earth for centuries, which protected them from harmful fungi. Wood typically only survives long-term in archaeological contexts, if it's either very wet, very dry, frozen, or charred. The Mediterranean's climate and soil rarely allow wood to last, making usable samples, quite scarce. The area where the samples were found was completely submerged by the wet mud of the Tiber River. This waterlogging created anoxic conditions, environments lacking oxygen where aerobic decay organisms just cannot survive. The planks came from up to 300-year-old oak trees, felled between 40 and 60 CE in the Jura Mountains of northeastern France. It is most likely that the wood was transported to the Eternal City on the Saône and Rhône rivers, and then across the Mediterranean Sea. This represents evidence of long-distance timber trading in the Roman Empire, not evidence of special preservation techniques applied to aqueduct timber. Waterlogged archaeological wood can present management challenges due to its vulnerability to chemical and biological decay, both during burial and post-excavation. decay processes also often leave it severely weakened and therefore susceptible to mechanical damage. The preservation occurs passively through environmental conditions, not through human intervention with oils or treatments. The Romans selected specific timber species for their natural properties. Quercus species, oak, was the dominant wood used for construction and tools, highlighting its importance in Roman society. The demand for wood for construction, shipbuilding and fire led to the rapid depletion of the woodlands surrounding Rome and in much of the Apennine Mountains running up the length of Italy. According to the historian Pliny, deforestation occurred in much of Rome's conquered lands, forcing rulers to send troops farther out in search of timber. Analysis of tree rings shows Romans sourced timber from vast distances. Growth rings reflect the environmental conditions a tree experiences over time in an area, so researchers can pinpoint where wood comes from by looking for trees with matching growth ring patterns, by measuring the tree ring widths and running statistical tests to determine average chronology. Researchers successfully dated 13 planks and traced them to northeastern France, over 1,700 kilometers from Rome. So why did Roman timber survive for so long without any special preservation? Well, it wasn't really down to ingenious techniques, but rather just fortunate burial conditions. When timber ends up in waterlogged environments, it gets preserved naturally because the lack of oxygen keeps decay at bay. The constant saturation actually prevents aerobic bacteria and fungi from breaking down the wood. And this is the same reason why Viking ships, medieval wells and even Bronze Age bridges have survived. When they're buried in wet conditions, nature does the preserving for us. Those mineral deposits you sometimes find in Roman timber vessels, they're not the result of any clever chemical treatments, but simply passive infiltration from groundwater over centuries. Hard, glassy, and sometimes translucent whitish minerals from the site gradually filled the wood's vascular structure. But all of this happened naturally. There was really no human engineering involved. The Romans didn't have any secret linseed oil recipes or preservation tricks. Instead, they just chose durable hardwoods, like oak, for their permanent constructions, and then, left it up to the environment to do the rest if the wood ended up buried in wet ground. These days, preserving excavated waterlogged wood is a whole different story and actually requires quite a bit of active intervention. Timbers are carefully removed, recorded, and then conserved, often by freeze-drying. For example, the sugar replacement treatment used to stabilize timber from an 11th century bridge needed more than 40 tons of pure sugar from British sugar. Yes, really. These modern techniques show just how challenging it is to keep wood intact once it's out of its protective waterlogged environment. It's a challenge the Romans never had to face, since their timber either stayed buried or, decayed completely. If you're enjoying these evidence-based explorations that cut through the myths and get to the archaeological facts about ancient technologies, do subscribe to Raw History, and feel free to share your thoughts on Roman engineering in the comments below.